This is the Sony A7S III. If you know anything about cameras or gear, you'll know that this camera is the camera to get right now for video. And that's interesting because I'm primarily a photographer. And so, I shoot on the A7R IV, and having two bodies is interesting because, I'm really cognizant of the things that I carry and, how much space I'm taking up and, how mobile I can be while I'm out in the field. And so having two bodies at the same time isn't always practical for me. Sometimes switching between two bodies causes me to miss moments and miss shots. Or, sometimes you want to do two things at once, or sometimes you just don't have enough space in your bag for, multiple bodies. Sometimes you just need one body, one lens, And so what I wanted to do was assess this camera from a photography perspective and see whether or not it fits into my workflow. And then I wanted to bring you guys on that journey as well. And so the three things that I look for when I'm assessing a camera from a photography perspective is number one, usability and autofocus. Number two, image quality. And number three, image resolution. Now, number three is a little bit interesting because this camera is only 12 megapixels, right? So later on in the video, we'll see what that means and what we can do with 12 megapixels. But for now, testing out usability and autofocus, we'll head into the city and we'll spend a couple of hours doing some street photography and really start to get a feel for what this thing is like from a photography perspective. All right, well, let me take this off. So we made it to the city and I just met up with my friend Demis. He's over there, he started shooting already. So what we're gonna do right now is we're going to put the A7S III through a couple of tests. So the things that are important to me, especially for street photography and for it being a general photography camera, is obviously autofocus and usability. So I don't suspect usability will be that different to the A7R IV because that's what I use all the time. But I'm really curious to see how the autofocus handles and how it performs, especially for street photography. So let's spend a couple of hours here in Sydney and we'll do some street photography. And we'll switch to POV mode because it's more interesting. I've got the 85 GM 1.4 on at the moment. The general subject tracking on these cameras are amazing, and so I want to really test that with the A7S III. So I've got 1/4 as my f-stop. I usually use ISO auto. For this camera, probably up to 1600, which is what I've got now. And then I change my shutter speed depending on the subject and how I want the exposure to work. There's this one alleyway that we're at right now in the back of Wynyard. And basically what the idea is here is, I really love the separation in the street, the left and the right. So I'm gonna wait for someone to walk through. So right now I'm using general subject tracking and it's locking on pretty crazy. I don't know if you can see that. Oh, I love the shadows here. This guy. Get some ones in portrait too. I love how it goes from light, dark, light, and then you get a mad silhouette of this guy. You know what would be mad? If someone walked through right now. Kind of like that. That little strip of light, come on. Come on. There we go, there we go, there we go. Then I'm gonna work the scene a little bit. This is one of the reasons why I love general subject tracking. It's because you can just grab onto a subject and then hold, and it just sticks, and you can just hold the shutter button. So like this. So I don't know if you can see that right there, but these lights are so dope. I wonder how this is going to look cropped in. This will be a really good test of the 12 megapixels and what it can do. The light looks kind of cool for photos though.
Yeah, exactly. You get that diagonal line.
Yeah, and then if you angle this high enough, then you can see the lines on both the tops and the bottoms. It's kind of nice. Ah, we're back here again. That'll do. All right, so one thing that I couldn't show you guys is that the viewfinder is actually really, really good in this camera. It's changed from 5.6 million dots to 9.4 million dots. And whilst those are just numbers, like you can actually see the difference between like this camera and say, you know, the A7R4. And it's also got like more magnification. So, you know, although this is a POV video like this right in front of me and I'm using the monitor at the back, like the viewfinder on this is fantastic and it's really, really good for like normal photography too. Nice. Bit of bicycle action. And these files, this camera feels so quick to review and zoom into pictures and go into the menus and all that kind of stuff. I wonder if it's like the actual processor that's making it faster or it's just like the file size. Look how fast that is. Like I'll go bang.
That is fast. Wait,
super instant, right? This guy sitting right here is kind of cool too. Usually on my A7R4, I'd actually use APS-C mode on this 85 so that I can get like 135-ish, and there's like a dude all the way at the end that I could punch in on. But with 12 megapixels, I'm unsure about how this is going to turn out. It might be good, it might not be. Let's just see what it looks like in Lightroom. Okay, so the actual image itself didn't turn out that great because we lost the light straight after I recorded that little bit, but this is the APS-C cropped version of that shot. And although it's shot intentionally dark, if we bring this up, we can see that at 100% crop, there's a lot of detail here. There's a lot of sharpness still, and there's a lot of information to be had, even though we're just upping the exposure by 2.3 stops. And that's really good. If we go back, this particular image is the full 12 megapixel shot, and we'll just up the exposure again and just take a look at what's available in the shadows. And there's a lot of recovery here. This is looking really good. I'm pretty impressed. What we've got here is a selection of stills that I've taken from the day. All of these images haven't been edited yet, except for pushing them through DNG conversion, because that's the format that I like to use. I'm not going to talk about ISO performance because we all know that the S3 is fantastic for noise. And my perspective on it anyway is that modern noise performance on modern cameras is like so good anyway. It's not really an issue anymore. And with the noise reduction in Lightroom, if you're using it properly, you can save so many stops of noise performance just by using that tool alone. And so let's not focus on that just for today. It's not really relevant for me anyway. What I wanted to really test, and you know, one of the reasons why I decided to shoot in the shadows is that I wanted to see just how far we can start to push these images from a real world perspective. So these are the settings that I shot for this particular image, and I shot it dark on purpose. I shot it like underexposed on purpose because I wanted to make sure that I captured all the highlight detail. But at the same time, it'll be interesting to see, you know, just how much detail we can get back. Right now, when it's underexposed, there's nothing in the shadows. And so if we just up this exposure, well, you'll use 2 just to like push it. I wouldn't normally use this much or shoot it, you know, that high up. But for the sake of this video and testing these images, we can see that there's a lot of detail back in the image in the corners here. We can see the detail of the pipes and all that kind of stuff. And that's really quite impressive. And all the highlights are now, you know, quite blown. So if we bring those back to like here, we can see we have all of the detail, which is quite nice. And then if we just go further just to push the files a lot more, like that's really, wow. That's quite flat actually, it was way too much, but you know, I'm quite happy with that actually. That kind of level of dynamic range is what you typically would see with, you know, the A7R4 even. Okay, now one thing I wanted to do just for fun, like this isn't a super technical comparison or anything like that. This is just a real world usability comparison. And so what I did was these 2 images down here, and they're identical. So one is shot on the A7R4 and the other is shot on the A7S III. And I wanted to see, like, from a detail perspective, what are the sharpness levels like? So what we can see here is that they're shot on 1/400, 5.6 ISO 100, and ISO 80 because that's the noise floor on the S3. They're both shot with the 16mm f2.8 G Master lens. And they're shot at like roughly, I tried to shoot them really quickly together just so that we would have the same conditions of light, and they're not too far off from one another, so it's not too bad. But let's have a look and see what it looks like when we're zooming in. And obviously the 61 megapixels of the A7R4 allows us to get way deeper into the image than the 12 megapixels of the S3. But just looking at a surface level from like a 100% crop, this is actually really good. These details are really nice. And so perhaps if we take the A7R4 files and we zoom out to, let's say, the same level, we can see that the detail is not too bad as well. Comparatively, they have a very similar amount of sharpness to them. And of course, this isn't completely 100% apples to apples, but it's good enough for us to have a look at the general performance and the comparison between the two sensors. One is obviously 61 megapixels and the other is obviously 12, but even at 100%, the S3 performs really, really well.
All right, so the next thing I wanted to talk about is image size and resolution. So this camera is a 12 megapixel camera. Sony decided on 12 megapixels because they were able to make the photo sites on the sensor larger. And larger photo sites equals better potential for light gathering, and that in turn equals better low light performance. Now, compared to, say, something like the A7R4, which has 61 megapixels, 12 megapixels doesn't sound like a lot, right? But resolution isn't everything. As we saw in the Lightroom tests just then, this camera is sharp at 100% zoom. And so that's great because it means that from a real world perspective, we can do a lot. We can make the most out of these 12 megapixels. And so for my own sanity, I had to write out a list of what 12 megapixels could actually do. And so 12 megapixels is 4240 by 2832. And most smartphones are actually 12 megapixels in size. And so anything you get off a smartphone will be, similar in size, so to set your expectation. But with the Sony A7S III, of course, the quality of it will be so much better, right? HD resolution is only 1920 by 1080. 4K resolution is only 3840 by 2160. However, 8K resolution is 7680 by 4320, and so that's out. But that means that 12 megapixels is more than enough for any phone or any TV that you're going to view this content on. And so the second thing I wanted to find out was about print, right? So according to this calculator, I can actually print at 300 DPI with no loss in detail for something around the size of just bigger than A4. And I can actually even take a hit on the DPI and increase the size of that as well, because modern printing techniques are actually really quite good. So we can kind of deduce this one to say, maybe A3, which is plenty large enough for most people. The next thing I wanted to cover is, Instagram. And obviously Instagram is an interesting one because it's on your device, right? But Instagram, the resolution for that is only 1080 by 1350 for 4:5 crop images. And that means that's a megapixel size of 1.46. And that means that 12 megapixels is actually 8.2 times what's required for posting on Instagram. And so that's really interesting. There's a lot of use cases here, surprising even to me, that 12 megapixels can still provide great results for. Okay, so where does that leave us? We know that the A7S III is phenomenal from a usability perspective. We know that the autofocus is fantastic. It's just as good, if not better, than the A7R4. We know that the image quality is fantastic as well. 100% crops looked great and the colors were amazing as well. we know that 12 megapixels isn't actually as small as it originally seemed to be. It still covers 80 to 90% of the use cases that we have, and that's most of the devices that we use to view images on today anyway. So it's been interesting. This little experiment has given me the confidence to know that the A7S III is a phenomenal stills camera as well. And I take a lot of like in-between type images, like in between moments when I'm traveling between like two big places, or like I'm just trying to document daily life or just make a memory or something like that. And I usually use the RX100 for those images because it's a compact camera and it's tiny. I can just chuck it around, and those files are like really nice on my computer because I have an old computer. And I think from now on I'll be using this. This A7S III is going to be so accessible to me when I'm shooting video, and I can just take a quick snap at the same time, and I can have relative confidence that it's going to look great. So while I'm still concerned about future-proofing my work with megapixels, and I'm still going to be using my Sony A7R IV and it's 61 megapixels as my main stills camera, I'm going to be using this for video and everything else from now on. I think it's that good. All right, I hope you enjoyed this video. Give it a thumbs up if you did, and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.